Have you ever felt a subtle shift in the air, a sudden chill from those around you? One day, life feels normal. You're sipping your morning coffee, texting a friend, living your truth. Then you notice it. Responses become terse, interest wanes, voices change. It's as if an invisible wall has risen between you and the world. But you haven't done anything wrong, have you? Perhaps you've simply become a little more conscious, a little more honest, a little more authentically you. This, my friends, is where Carl Jung's curse of perception begins. It's a profound journey into self-awareness, emotional healing, and overcoming the adversity of misunderstanding. The sudden aversion others feel towards you often isn't a flaw on your part. Instead, it's an unintentional confrontation with their own subconscious. A word, a glance, even your silence can trigger a repressed emotion within them. This activation makes you a perceived threat, for you are a mirror they are unwilling to face. Jung argued that most people navigate life by suppressing their inner darkness. This darkness, the shadow, exists secretly within each of us, yet some individuals, those with heightened awareness and intuitive perception, recognize this shadow. Your mere presence can activate the subconscious of others. In a way, you unknowingly reveal their inner secrets. Then, a defense mechanism kicks in. Aversion or even outright hatred. This isn't rational, it's a visceral reaction. They become tense in your presence, inexplicably angry, and begin to misjudge you. According to Jung, this stems from the discrepancy between their level of consciousness and their repressed content. You are a mirror. They don't want to see themselves in that mirror, so they blame the mirror. You've changed, they might say. You're not who you used to be. But in reality, you have changed, and your growth illuminates their stagnation. This transformation is perceived as a threat. It's a challenging truth for young adults navigating identity, for psychology students delving into the psyche, and for spiritual seekers on their path to enlightenment. Jung's concept of the shadow is crucial here. It's the secret chamber of the human psyche, housing repressed desires, hidden fears, and unaccepted aspects of ourselves. It's the dark side of the unconscious, present in everyone, yet few dare to look within. The shadow isn't just what's hidden from us, it's what we want to hide. Unexplained anger, dismissive behavior, a sudden outburst of jealousy. These are the languages of the shadow. We often label these as someone else's fault, yet these reflections are silent whispers of aspects of ourselves we've denied. When people suddenly begin to dislike you, it's often because you've made their shadow conscious. Your words, your silence, or simply your authentic presence have exposed their suppressed aspects. You've unknowingly opened a door to their subconscious, and what emerges through that door frightens them. Confronting the shadow is like seeing oneself naked, vulnerable. When someone recognizes their weaknesses, their lies, their repressed desires, they first deny them. Then they use that denial to blame you. Jung famously said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But most people don't want to hear this truth, as it implies taking responsibility for themselves. Therefore, their subconscious perceives you as an enemy. When you speak with your consciousness, you are essentially holding up a mirror. They see themselves in it, but they reflect what they see back onto you. They might say you are selfish while avoiding their own egoism. They might claim you are cold while suppressing their own unloving side. This psychological process is what Jung called projection, the unconscious casting of inner content onto the external world. Blaming someone else is, in reality, a way to avoid confronting one's own shadow. The human mind often seeks psychological equilibrium by projecting repressed aspects of itself onto the external world. This mechanism, projection, is one of the most subtle defense mechanisms of human consciousness, according to Jung. When an individual encounters an aspect of themselves they cannot accept, they don't reject it, they project it onto someone else. This is a silent yet effective dialogue between the unconscious and the conscious. Someone who suppresses inner rage, for instance, will constantly perceive aggression in their environment. An individual who fails to recognize their own hypocrisy will focus intently on the false behavior of others. In this way, a person can continue their life without ever confronting the darkness within. However, this avoidance slowly traps them in their own inner prison. Projection causes us to unconsciously view our inner world from the outside. Every judgment we make is, in reality, a mirror pointed back at ourselves. If we find someone arrogant, we have already touched upon that arrogance somewhere within ourselves. If we describe someone as lazy, selfish, or insensitive, we are actually engaged in an internal struggle with those very qualities. Jung explained this. The faults you see in others are an echo of your own shadow. Gaining this awareness is difficult, as the ego hates to see its own flaws. The ego always seeks to protect the I, even if it means distorting reality and resorting to projection to avoid guilt and shame. This is why people often say, "It's not me, it's them." This statement is not a defense, it's an escape. Projection is not just an illusion, it carries a message. The unconscious reveals our own weaknesses through external people. Every person we dislike is a symbol of an aspect of ourselves we reject. Every person we admire represents a potential we have yet to develop. Therefore, Jung stated, man's fate is determined by his shadow, of which he is unconscious. Any aspect of ourselves of which we are unaware manifests in the external world as a character, event, or relationship. Those who do not achieve this awareness constantly draw the same people into their lives. Every relationship, every conflict, every grievance is, in reality, the repetition of an inner cycle. Jung saw this as the soul's feedback system. The universe helps individuals achieve wholeness by making the unconscious visible. However, if this message is ignored, the cycle increasingly hardens. The same events repeat. The same people return with different faces until one honestly looks into their own reflection. Recognizing projection is the first sign of inner strength, for at that moment one begins to reclaim their inner darkness from the outside. Questions like, what does this person remind me of? Why does this behavior make me so angry? Why do some people inspire me to peace and others to hatred? These are the beginning of a dialogue with the shadow. Honest answers to these questions slowly dissolve the walls of the unconscious. But most people stop at this point because it is painful to look at the darkness within. As long as one does not stop blaming others and turns to their own thoughts, they cannot be free. One of Jung's students once asked him, "How is it that so many people experience the same pain over and over again?" Jung replied simply, "Because they don't change the story, they change the characters." This sentence summarizes the cyclical nature of projection. As long as a person does not change their own story, they learn the same lesson in different ways. Every new relationship reopens an old wound. Every outburst of anger expresses a suppressed feeling. But when one realizes that these projections originate in their own mind, they stop looking for external culprits. At this moment, the development of the soul begins. Consciousness initially appears as a gift, yet it often begins as a burden. Once a person starts to recognize their own unconscious, they can no longer live as they did before. They clearly see behavioral patterns, automatic reactions, and inner contradictions they previously ignored. There is no escape. Every emotion, every thought, every outburst of anger or anxiety becomes a telltale sign. As Jung said, when consciousness expands, the peace of ignorance vanishes. Once awake, a person can never truly fall back asleep. This awareness often plunges them into deep solitude, for they can no longer see the world as they once did. Conversations seem superficial, relationships artificial, and goals meaningless. Suddenly, one is caught between their inner reality and the reality of society. You can no longer behave like everyone else, but you also no longer know who you truly are. This feeling of being in between is the initial pain of spiritual transformation. You can no longer wear the shell of your old self, but your new self is not yet fully formed. This process is a time of inner teaching, which many call the dark night of the soul. According to Jung, this isolation is not a sickness but a birth. The soul withdraws to find its own center. By retreating from the noise of the external world, it begins to hear its inner voice. From the outside, however, this process often appears like a breakdown. People distance themselves from friends, lose social contacts, and their interests change. They no longer seek superficial conversations but deeper meaning. They spend time with their own thoughts, not with others. Many fear this period, for when the mind is still, suppressed emotions rise to the surface, yet this solitude is the most sacred phase of consciousness. Isolation is the space for the soul's restructuring. In this silence, one hears the echoes of their own mind. Childhood traumas, repressed desires, and postponed regrets gradually come to light. Confronting each of these is not easy, for consciousness brings not only light but also shadow. When you deeply know yourself, you begin to see others as they truly are. This awareness creates a kind of transparency. You now recognize masks, sense lies, and understand manipulations. This, in turn, leads to an increasing isolation from society. As consciousness grows, authenticity diminishes. People refuse to live on the surface. Paradoxically, this isolation is actually the beginning of a closer relationship, for the individual no longer tries to understand others but themselves. Isolation is the space where you truly meet yourself for the first time. In this silence, you hear the pure consciousness that stands above the noise of the mind. And in this moment, you realize that consciousness does not separate you from society, but places you in a deeper form of existence. This transition, however, is painful because the ego resists its demise. Questions like, why am I lonely? Why does no one understand me? And why does nothing satisfy me? Are frequently asked during this time. Yet each of these questions is an indicator of an inner transformation. Jung described this phase as the necessary solitude of the individuation process. The soul must withdraw from the world to reach its own center. Every person eventually enters this inner cave. It is dark because it contains all suppressed parts. But if one dares to stay there, the darkness gradually transforms into light. In doing so, one loses the need for external validation. Orientation is no longer found externally, but internally. The identity once shaped by the opinions of others gives way to a quiet freedom. One now trusts their own inner compass. At this moment, awareness becomes not a curse but a blessing, for one is no longer dependent on external circumstances. One has found their inner balance. The purpose of isolation is not to be alone but to hear oneself. In this silence, one experiences a deep peace beneath consciousness. This peace cannot be altered by anything external. When one begins to live with this awareness, they see everything with different eyes. Conscious integration is the ultimate transformation of the human psyche. In this stage, you no longer just recognize your shadow, you accept it. In Jungian psychology, this is the core of individuation. The process of becoming whole with the fragments, opposites, contradictions, and suppressed aspects within oneself. In this process, you stop distinguishing between light and darkness, for you understand that one cannot exist without the other. Conscious integration is not just awareness, it is acceptance. Instead of rejecting anger, fear, jealousy, or ambition within yourself, you begin to understand why they are there. These emotions are no longer enemies. You recognize that they are merely misguided forms of inner energy. Jung described this transformation as the alchemy of the soul. Just as the alchemist attempts to transform lead into gold, so too does the individual attempt to transform their inner darkness into the light of consciousness. This does not happen through intellectual understanding but through direct experience. When you confront your shadow, you are no longer afraid, for you know that the shadow is yourself. To reject it means to abandon your own integrity. Conscious integration is the moment when the inner war ends. There is no longer a battle between good and evil, for you understand that good and evil spring from the same source, the energy of the unconscious. In this phase, you learn to hold inner opposites in harmony. You become an observer of emotions, not their master. You no longer suppress them, nor do you explode when angry. You simply observe. You do not flee when afraid, but become curious about the source of the fear. For with growing consciousness, emotions do not become uncontrollable. On the contrary, their observation leads to a natural serenity. This serenity is the strongest sign of conscious integration. You no longer struggle with yourself. You no longer need masks or the approval of others. For those who have made peace with the darkness within are unaffected by the judgments of the external world. Jung called this state self-knowledge. It means recognizing your own essence. You see who you are in all your facets. You no longer blame anyone, for you know that everything is merely a reflection. You no longer regret your past, because you understand that without these experiences, today's consciousness would not be possible. At this point, the individual does not control their destiny, but their own existence. The greatest power of conscious integration is freedom, for you are no longer a slave to automatic behaviors, unconscious projections, or suppressed fears. You no longer react, you respond. Conscious integration leads you back to your center. No external storm can disturb your peace, for this center is no longer located in the external world but within yourself. In this center, love, understanding, and peace exist naturally. They require no effort, for wholeness is natural. The fragmented mind struggles, but the unified mind simply exists. Therefore, with integration, effort ends and existence begins. In Jung's words, when you accept yourself completely, everything changes. This acceptance is not passive surrender but deep wisdom, because you no longer try to control life but begin to flow with it. You recognize that even pain has meaning, even the shadow has a purpose. At this point, you stop fighting against life. You no longer force anything because you know that everything happens as it should. This is the essence of Stoicism, a life in harmony with nature. conscious integration leads to a wisdom that is both stoic and Jungian, aware of emotions but free from them, engaged in life but not dependent on it, living in the world with consciousness but above it. The existence of such a person radiates peace because they have their inner energy in balance. The burden of the past does not crush them, nor does the uncertainty of the future frighten them. They simply live in the here and now. This is conscious integration in its purest form, being present in the here and now with one's entire existence. At this point, a person is no longer healed, for they were never corrupt. They simply misunderstood themselves. And where this misunderstanding ends, true freedom begins. Conscious integration is the moment when you remember to be both human and spirit. In this moment, the inner struggle ends and is replaced by silent wisdom. You no longer have to prove anything. You simply exist, simply, consciously, and wholly. Transformation doesn't always happen with a spectacular explosion. It is often a quiet, unnoticed process. In Jungian psychology, true evolution begins in the innermost depths of the psyche and gradually reflects in the external world. Once a person confronts their shadow, recognizes their projections, and achieves conscious integration, they cannot return to their old life. For once gained, consciousness is not lost. It illuminates the interior like a light, and no shadow can completely obscure it. This victory is silent because most people cannot see this transformation. They only observe behavior, reactions, or decisions from the outside. Outwardly, a person may appear the same, but their inner world has radically changed. This change replaces anger with understanding, fear with curiosity, and reaction with observation. A person no longer acts according to the judgments of others, but according to their own consciousness. Jung's clinical observations show that when a person reaches this stage, the people around them may remain the same, but the individual is no longer affected by their unchangeability. This is the clearest sign of a silent victory. The perceptions of others, outbursts of anger, or prejudices can no longer shake the person's spirit. The individual has found peace with their inner center. This center cannot be shaken by the pain of the past or the uncertainty of the future. For the person now realizes that control over life is not in the hands of others but within themselves. This awareness creates a quiet but powerful freedom. One no longer lives in old patterns. One no longer follows old fears. One no longer makes conscious decisions but reflexive reactions. These decisions have a small but lasting effect. The silent victory lies in life itself, in a smile, a moment of patience and understanding glance, or even in not reacting at all. One has now fought and won the battle not with the external world but with oneself. In human relationships, one behaves differently. One no longer reacts as before. Feelings of anger, jealousy, pain, or disappointment do not disappear, but they are no longer uncontrollable. One observes them, tries to understand them, and changes them if necessary. This attentive attitude makes it possible not to take the behavior of others personally. One is no longer a victim of projections. One understands their source and observes them without being influenced. The silent victory also means being aware of one's personal boundaries. One does not succumb to the manipulations, judgments, or expectations of others. However, this is not done to create conflict but to preserve one's own integrity. As Jung emphasized, true freedom lies not in changing others but in changing oneself. This transformation culminates in a silent victory, for one no longer needs external validation. One has earned inner validation. One adapts to the rhythm of life. One does not force, does not try to control, does not react. One simply exists, and this existence is a silent but profound victory. For one is no longer limited by the shadow of the past or the reflections of others. One is free through one's own consciousness, and this freedom breaks all invisible chains. The silent victory is a power whose greatness lies in its stillness. It is imperceptible from the outside, yet it changes one's entire life. No matter how lonely you feel, you have gained strength within yourself, and this strength enables you to overcome all the challenges of the world. This strength is the result of awareness, confrontation with the shadow, and conscious integration. Therefore, Jung describes transformation not as a struggle but as a victory, a silent, profound, yet decisive victory. If you're ready to explore your inner transformation, confront your shadow, and experience the power of conscious integration, share in the comments below what shadow reflections you've encountered. Discuss your experiences with other seekers on this journey of silent triumph. You can also deepen your journey of consciousness by watching more videos on psychology and Carl Jung on our channel. Please subscribe for more empowering content. If you wish to support us, you can become a member by clicking the Join button. Thank you, Mikhail Massa, for embarking on this profound exploration with us.